She'll never find out. She's too busy being the perfect little wife. Ryan Carter laughed when he said it, laughed sitting across from his mistress at a candle-lit table, holding her hand, while his wife was home alone, waiting for him. He ordered the most expensive bottle on the menu. He made promises he had no intention of keeping. He believed completely and without question that he was untouchable. That was Friday night. The following Friday, same restaurant, different table. A waiter walked up behind him, set a thick envelope on the white tablecloth, and said quietly, "Sir, this is from your wife." Ryan Carter stopped breathing. If this story makes you feel something tonight, please subscribe to our channel. Drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, stay with me because what happens next will shock you. Emily Carter was not the kind of woman who went looking for trouble. That was the thing people never understood about her. Not her friends, not her coworkers, and certainly not her husband. She was the kind of person who believed the best in people until the evidence became so overwhelming that believing anything else would have required a special kind of willful blindness. She was organized, composed, deeply loyal, and if she was honest with herself, which she tried always to be perhaps a little too trusting for a woman who had spent 10 years married to Ryan Carter. 10 years. She used to say that number with pride at dinner parties, at family gatherings when younger couples asked her what the secret was. 10 years, and she would smile in that quiet way of hers and say communication, honesty, showing up for each other every single day. She believed every word of it. She had built her entire adult life around those words. So when the receipt fell out of Ryan's suit jacket on a Tuesday morning in October, Emily almost didn't pick it up. She was doing laundry. Ryan had already left for work. The house was quiet in that particular way it always was on weekday mornings. The kind of quiet that used to feel peaceful to her, that she used to stand in for just a moment before the day began. She had his charcoal gray suit in her arms, the one he'd worn Friday night, and when she turned it inside out to check the pockets before she dropped it into the dry cleaning bag, the receipt fluttered out and landed face up on the hardwood floor. She almost didn't look at it. She picked it up the way you pick up any piece of paper that lands on your floor automatically, without thinking, and she was already moving toward the trash can in the kitchen when the numbers registered in her brain. She stopped walking. She looked down at the paper in her hand. $412 dinner for 2 Friday night at Maison Lair, a French restaurant downtown that Emily had mentioned wanting to try for 2 years and that Ryan had consistently described as overpriced and pretentious every single time she brought it up. Her first thought, the thought she would later be almost ashamed of, was completely innocent. She thought maybe he was taking a client out. Maybe it was a business dinner and he forgot to expense it. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation for why her husband had spent $412 at the most romantic restaurant in Dallas on a Friday night when he had told her he was stuck at the office until 10:00. She stood there in her kitchen, holding that receipt, and she thought every generous, forgiving thing she could think of. And then she thought about Friday night. She had been on the couch when he came home. She had been watching television and waiting for him. And when he finally walked in at 10:15, she had asked him how the meeting went. And he had said she could hear his voice so clearly, right now. It was almost like he was standing next to her. He had said, long exhausting, "I'm just glad it's over." He had kissed her on the top of her head. He had gone upstairs. He had showered. He had showered when he came home from work. She had noticed that at the time and filed it away without knowing why. Now she knew why. Her hand was trembling slightly as she set the receipt down on the kitchen counter. She pressed her palms flat against the cool granite and she breathed in and out. In and out. She was not going to fall apart in her own kitchen at 7:30 in the morning over a restaurant receipt. She was not that woman. She had always prided herself on not being that woman. But the trembling didn't stop. She took out her phone. She opened the browser. She typed in the name of the restaurant and pulled up their menu and looked at the prices. 2 appetizers, 2 entree, 2 desserts. a bottle of wine that cost more than their grocery bill for 2 weeks. That was $412 at Maison. That was a dinner that took planning. That was a reservation made in advance. That was not a spontaneous business meeting that accidentally ended at an expensive French restaurant. Emily set her phone down very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands aren't entirely under your control. She picked up her dry cleaning. She finished the laundry. She went to work. She did not say a single word to anyone. That afternoon, Ryan called her at 2:00, the way he always did on Tuesdays. He asked how her day was going. He told her a mildly funny story about something that happened at a lunch meeting. He said he'd be home by 7 and asked if she wanted him to pick up Thai food on the way. She said sure. Thai food sounded great. She asked him how work was going. He said busy. He said they had a big account, keeping him on his toes. She said she understood. She listened to his voice the entire time she was on the phone. Listened to it, the way you listen to something you're studying, looking for the place where the surface breaks, where the performance shows through. She heard nothing. His voice was warm and easy and completely effortlessly natural. He sounded like a man with absolutely nothing to hide. She thought, either I am wrong or this man is very, very good at this. When she hung up, she sat at her desk for 3 full minutes without moving. Then she opened her laptop. Then she typed his email address into the recovery field. She already knew his password. They had always shared passwords. It was one of those things they had established early on as a symbol of trust, of transparency. She had never once used it to check on him. Not once in 10 years. She used it now. She opened his inbox. She searched for Maison. The email thread came up immediately. The reservation was in his name. The confirmation email said, Table for 2, Friday, October 3rd, 700 p.m. Special request window, table champagne on arrival. Champagne on arrival for a business meeting. Emily's hands went completely still on the keyboard. She scrolled down. There was another email below the reservation. A reply from someone at the restaurant confirming that the champagne and rose petals arrangement had been set up as requested. Rose petals. Her husband had ordered rose petals for a business dinner. She closed the laptop. She looked out the window of her office at the Dallas skyline, and she breathed very carefully, very deliberately, the way you breathe when you are trying not to make a sound in a place where you absolutely cannot make a sound. She did not cry. She was a little surprised by that she had expected to cry. Instead, what she felt was something colder and much more focused. It was the feeling of a door closing somewhere inside her. It was the feeling of something that had been soft becoming something harder. She thought, I need to know everything before I do anything. She started small. She told herself she would give it 1 week. 1 week of quiet watching, of careful noticing before she allowed herself to draw any conclusions. She was a rational woman. She worked in marketing, which meant she understood that evidence needed to be gathered, analyzed, and confirmed before you built a campaign around it. She would treat this the same way, systematic, logical. She would not let emotion drive the process. The problem was that evidence, once you started looking for it, had a terrible way of presenting itself very quickly. By Wednesday, she had found 2 more receipts, not in his suits, but in the recycling bin under his desk in the home office where he worked some evenings. One was from a hotel, the Adolphus, one of the oldest, most beautiful hotels in the city. The receipt showed 2 nights, one in September, one in August. She had not known about either of those nights. On both of those nights, Ryan had told her he was out with clients. By Thursday, she had found the second phone. She found it by accident, the way most people find the things they were never supposed to find. She had been looking for the car insurance documents in the filing cabinet in the home office when she pulled out a folder, and the phone slid out from behind it and landed on the floor face up. It was a cheap prepaid phone, the kind teenagers used when they didn't want their parents to see their call history. It was locked, but she didn't need to unlock it to see the screen notification that lit up while it was in her hand. A text message from a contact, saved as simply, "Oh, The message said, "Miss you already. Can't stop thinking about last night." The phone buzzed again. Another message. "When are you going to tell her I'm tired of waiting?" Emily sat on the floor of her home office with her husband's secret phone in her hand. And she read those two messages, probably 15 times. She read them until the words stopped meaning anything and were just shapes on a screen. She sat there until she heard the sound of Ryan's car in the driveway. She put the phone back exactly where she found it. She put the folder back exactly how it was. She walked to the kitchen and she started making dinner. When Ryan walked in 2 minutes later, she turned around from the stove and she smiled at him. "Hey," she said, "how was your day?" He kissed her cheek. He set his keys on the counter. He said, "Long but better now." She nodded. She turned back to the stove. She thought, "You have absolutely no idea what I know." And for the first time in days, she felt something that was almost like power. That night, after Ryan was asleep, Emily sat on the edge of the bathtub in the master bathroom with the door locked and her phone in her hands, and she allowed herself exactly 20 minutes to fall apart. She cried finally. She cried the way you cry when you've been holding it together for days, and your body finally refuses to cooperate quietly. Shoulders shaking, both hands pressed over her mouth so that no sound escaped into the bedroom where her husband was sleeping. She cried for the 10 years. She cried for the conversations about starting a family they'd had just 3 months ago when Ryan had sat across from her at breakfast and said he thought maybe they were finally ready. She cried for every anniversary dinner and birthday card and Sunday morning where she had looked at him and thought, "This is real. This is mine. I am lucky." She cried for the woman she had been 20 minutes ago who still believed that. At the 19-minute mark, she stopped. She washed her face with cold water. She looked at herself in the mirror. Really look the way you look at yourself when you're trying to decide who you are going to be now. She thought about her grandmother, a woman who had survived things that made this look like nothing. A woman who used to say, "The first thing grief tries to do is make you stupid. Don't let it." Emily dried her face. She went back to the bedroom. She lay down next to Ryan and she looked at the ceiling in the dark and she made a list in her head. The list was not about how to save her marriage. The list was about what she needed to do next. The first call she made was to a woman named Patricia Novak. Patricia Novak was a divorce attorney whose name Emily had seen mentioned 3 times in the past year. Once in a magazine article about high-asset divorce cases in Texas. Once in a conversation at a professional event that she had filed away in the back of her mind for no reason she could have articulated at the time. And once in a text from her college roommate Claire, who had used Patricia 18 months ago and described her as quote a surgeon. She goes in. She takes exactly what's yours. And she leaves no scar. Emily called Patricia's office at 8:15 on a Friday morning from her car in the parking garage at work, before she went inside with the engine still running. Patricia's assistant answered. Emily said she needed to speak with Ms. Novak about a potential representation. She was told that Ms. Novak was in a meeting until 10:00 but could call back. Emily left her number. She said it was important. Patricia called her at 10:03. "Ms. Carter," she said. Her voice was exactly what Emily had hoped for. Calm, precise, completely unimpressed by anything. "Tell me what's happening." Emily told her. She told her in the same organized, evidence-led way she presented marketing data to clients, systematically, starting with the receipt moving through the hotel records, ending with the phone. She kept her voice level. She did not editorialize. She stated facts. When she was done, there was a brief silence. Then Patricia said, "How long do you think this has been going on?" Emily said, "Based on what I found, at least 6 months, possibly longer." Patricia said, "Do you want to save the marriage or end it?" Emily had expected to hesitate on that question. She didn't. "End it," she said, "but I want to do it right." Patricia said, "Good. Come in Monday morning. Bring everything you found. And Miss Carter, one very important instruction between now and Monday. Yes. Do not change your behavior. Don't confront him. Don't move money. Don't say anything that tips him off. The element of surprise is the most valuable asset you currently have. Don't waste it, Emily said. I understand. She sat in her car for another 4 minutes after she hung up, looking at the steering wheel. Then she went inside and had a completely normal day. Monday's meeting with Patricia was 2 hours long. Patricia reviewed everything Emily had brought the receipts. The photographs Emily had discreetly taken of the hotel confirmation emails on Ryan's computer. The notes Emily had made with dates and times. Patricia was thorough and quiet while she worked through it. She asked precise questions. She wrote things down in a legal pad in a handwriting so small Emily could barely read it from across the desk. At the end, Patricia set down her pen and folded her hands on the desk and looked at Emily directly. She said, "You've been very thorough. That's going to help us." Emily said, "What do we do first?" Patricia said, "First, we establish your financial position completely. I want to know everything that's jointly held, everything in his name, everything in your name, every account, every asset, every debt. I have a forensic accountant I work with regularly. I'm going to bring him in." Emily nodded. Patricia continued, "Second, we're going to document everything that's still happening. I have an investigator my firm works with. She's excellent. She's discreet. I'd like to authorize her to conduct surveillance for the next 30 days. Emily said surveillance. "You mean I mean photographs, documented meetings, confirmed evidence of the ongoing affair. In Texas, adultery can be considered by the court in the division of marital assets. Given the asset profile you've described, that matters." Emily said, "Do it." Patricia said, "There's one more thing I want to discuss with you." "What?" Patricia looked at her steadily. "Are you doing all right, Miss Carter? Because what you're about to go through is a process, and it's going to take time, and I need to know that you can hold together through it." Emily thought about the 20 minutes on the edge of the bathtub. She thought about looking at herself in the mirror. She thought about her grandmother. She said, "I've been holding together my whole life. Miss Novak, that's not going to be the problem." Patricia studied her for a moment. Then she said, "No, I don't think it will be." The surveillance confirmed everything within 2 weeks. The investigator, a quiet, methodical woman named Sandra, who wore unremarkable clothes and drove an unremarkable car, provided Emily and Patricia with a folder that contained photographs, detailed logs, and documented evidence of 17 separate meetings between Ryan Carter and Olivia Brooks over a period of 63 days. Olivia Brooks, that was her name. That was the shape of the thing. Emily looked at the photographs with the same deliberate steadiness she brought to everything now. Olivia was 27. She worked in Ryan's company as a junior account manager. She was pretty in the uncomplicated way that people who haven't yet learned that the world is complicated tend to be pretty. She looked in the photographs like someone who believed she was about to get everything she wanted. Emily felt something looking at those photographs, but it wasn't what she expected. It wasn't rage, and it wasn't grief, and it wasn't the particular humiliation of comparison. What she felt was something closer to pity. Not for Olivia the way you pity someone you feel superior to, but for Olivia the way you pity someone who is standing in a room where the walls are about to come down and has absolutely no idea. She said to Patricia, "He's told her he's going to leave me." Patricia looked up from the folder. "Yes." Sandra confirmed that from conversations she was able to document. "He's made commitments to her. He's told her it will happen soon." Emily said, "He's been lying to both of us the whole time." Patricia said, "Yes." Emily closed the folder. She set it back on Patricia's desk. She said, "I want to talk about the plan." And it was in that meeting on a Thursday afternoon in Patricia Novak's elegant, quietly powerful office on the 15th floor of a building downtown that the plan was born. It started with Sandra's intelligence. Ryan had made a reservation. Sandra had confirmed it through sources Emily didn't ask about and didn't need to know at Meridian, the most exclusive restaurant in Dallas, for the following Friday night. The reservation was in Ryan's name. The booking notes described it as a special occasion dinner. Sandra had learned through careful listening that Ryan intended to use the dinner to tell Olivia that he was officially ready to leave Emily. that this was going to be the night everything changed, that he was going to walk into that restaurant as a man still technically married and walk out as a man who had made his choice publicly and permanently. Emily listened to all of this. She said, what if he walked into that restaurant thinking one thing and walked out with something entirely different? Patricia had been waiting for this moment. Emily could see it in the slight shift of expression, the almost smile that crossed the attorney's face. Patricia opened a desk drawer and slid a large manila envelope across the desk. I had these prepared, she said, 3 days ago. I was waiting to see if you'd arrive at the same conclusion I did. Emily looked at the envelope. She said, the divorce papers. Patricia said, complete, signed by me, requiring only his signature and accompanied by every piece of evidence we've gathered, organized and attached. Emily picked up the envelope. It was heavier than she expected. She thought about Ryan standing at that restaurant. She thought about the candlelight and the champagne and Olivia across the table. Believing this was the beginning of her story. She thought about the moment a waiter would set this envelope in front of him. She said, how do we make sure it gets delivered? Patricia said, leave that to me. Emily set the envelope back down on the desk. She breathed in. She breathed out. She said, let's do it. In the days that followed, Emily moved with a kind of quiet efficiency that she would later describe to Claire as the most focused I have ever been in my life. She was not angry, or rather she was, but the anger had been converted into something operational, something useful, the way a very good engine converts fuel. She was not sad, or rather she was, but the sadness was something she had scheduled, something she allowed herself in small, controlled intervals, and then set aside to be returned to later when there was time. She was above everything else ready. She arranged for her belongings, the things that mattered to her, the photographs and the jewelry and the objects from her childhood, and the small paintings she had collected over the years to be moved to Claire's apartment in small, unremarkable increments over the course of a week. She did this quietly, methodically on days when Ryan was at the office using the back of her own car, and 2 afternoons when she told her assistant she was working from home. She changed the direct deposit on her paychecks to an account Ryan didn't know about. She spoke with the forensic accountant Patricia had recommended and followed every instruction precisely. She knew down to the dollar exactly where she stood financially. She knew what was hers, what was his, and what the court would likely determine belonged to her given the evidence they had of his conduct. She was, as Patricia had said at their last meeting, in a very strong position. She signed a lease on an apartment she had not yet seen in person, but had toured virtually a clean, bright place in a neighborhood she had always liked, not far from her office, with a balcony that faced the skyline. She put down the deposit in 2 months' rent, and she did not tell a single person except Patricia. On the Thursday night before the Friday of the dinner, Ryan made pasta at home and poured a glass of wine and asked her what she'd been thinking about lately because she seemed a little quiet. She said, just work. Big project. I'll tell you about it when it's done. He nodded. He said he understood. He said, that's my girl, always working. She smiled. She looked at him across the dinner table. This man she had loved. This man she had chosen. This man who had sat in this kitchen 3 months ago and talked about having children with her while his secret phone was hidden in the filing cabinet 12 feet away. And she felt something that was so complicated she couldn't name it. Grief and anger and something that was almost forgiveness. Not the forgiveness that means it's okay, but the forgiveness that means I am putting this down and walking away. She thought tomorrow night all of this ends. He said, I have a late dinner tomorrow. Client thing. Don't wait up. She said, okay. She took a sip of her wine. She said, I hope it goes well. And she meant it not for him, but for herself. She hoped it went exactly as planned. She hoped every carefully arranged detail landed perfectly. She hoped that when that envelope hit the table in front of Ryan Carter at Meridian Restaurant on Friday night, it landed with the weight of every lie he had ever told. She finished her pasta. She washed the dishes. She went to bed. She slept better than she had in months. The morning after she slept through the night for the first time in weeks, Emily Carter woke up at 5:45, made herself a cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen. Ryan was still asleep upstairs. She could hear nothing from the bedroom, no movement, no sound, and in that particular silence, she wrote out everything she needed to do in order with no wasted words. She had made her decision. Now she needed to execute it. Patricia had been clear precision mattered more than speed. Every move Emily made in the coming weeks needed to be deliberate, documented, and defensible. She could not afford to act out of emotion. She could not afford a single mistake. And the part of Emily that had spent 15 years building a career in a competitive industry, the part that could look at a failing campaign, diagnose exactly what was wrong, and rebuild it from the ground up without losing her composure. That part of her understood the assignment completely. She started writing. She wrote financial accounts. She wrote personal items. She wrote apartment. She wrote Patricia. She wrote Sandra. She wrote Claire. She looked at the list for a moment. Then she wrote at the bottom, underlined, twice Friday night. She finished her coffee. She rinsed the cup. She folded the legal pad and tucked it into her work bag. Then she walked upstairs and got dressed for work in the same closet where her husband was still sleeping, moving quietly, choosing her clothes with the same calm focus she brought to everything. Now, she left the house at 6:50. Ryan didn't stir. She didn't look back at the house when she pulled out of the driveway. She had a lot of work to do. The first call she made that morning before she even reached the office, sitting in traffic on Central Expressway at 7:15 with the sun coming up flat and gold over the city, was to Patricia. Patricia answered on the second ring. "You're up early." Patricia said, "I've been thinking about the timing." Emily said, "If the reservation is for Friday the 14th, I need to know how far in advance the papers can be delivered to the restaurant. And I need to know how they're going to be received. I mean, physically received. Who handles it? What the protocol is." Patricia said, "I've already been in contact with Meridian's manager. His name is Charles Beaumont. He came highly recommended by a colleague. He's handled sensitive situations before, and he understands discretion. He'll accept the envelope from my office on Thursday afternoon and hold it in his personal office until Friday evening." Emily said, "And he understands what the envelope contains." Patricia said he understands that it's a legal document that needs to be delivered to a Mr. Ryan Carter at his table at a specific time by one of his staff. Emily said, "What time?" Patricia said, "That's what I wanted to discuss with you. Sandra believes Ryan will arrive between 7 and 7:15, based on previous patterns. He tends to order drinks first. Let the conversation settle, then move to the main purpose of the evening, if we want maximum impact. And I believe we do. The delivery should happen no earlier than 7:45, late enough that they're comfortable, early enough that the restaurant is still full." Emily was quiet for a moment. Then she said 7:45. Patricia said 7:45. Emily said perfect. She hung up and drove the rest of the way to the office in silence. She was not shaking. She was not crying. She was thinking carefully and clearly about every detail the way a surgeon thinks before making the first cut. Not with hesitation, but with total precision. This was not revenge. She told herself. She had said it to Patricia, and she believed it. This was accountability. This was truth finding the surface after being held underwater for far too long. This was Emily Carter, refusing to disappear quietly. At 9:00 that same morning, she called the forensic accountant, a careful and methodical man named Gerald Hull, who communicated exclusively in facts and appeared constitutionally incapable of either small talk or alarm. Gerald told her that his review of the joint financial accounts was complete, and what he found made Emily grip her phone a little tighter. "Mr. Carter has been making cash withdrawals," Gerald said, "in irregular amounts over the past 8 months. 50 here, 200 there. Nothing large enough to trigger automatic flags, but consistent. I've also identified what appears to be a secondary credit account in his name alone that was opened approximately 9 months ago and has been used exclusively for hospitality expenses. Restaurants, hotels. 2 transactions that look like jewelry purchases. Emily said jewelry. Gerald said a bracelet and a necklace based on the vendor codes. Combined value, approximately $3. For 100, Emily said nothing for 4 seconds. Then she said, "And our joint savings." Gerald said, "Untouched. The retirement accounts are intact. The home equity is unchanged. He's been careful. He's been funding this separately, not rating what you share. Either he's protecting himself legally, or he genuinely didn't want you to notice a discrepancy." Emily said, "Or both." Gerald said, "Or both." Yes, she thanked him. She told him to send his full report to Patricia. She hung up and looked at her office wall for a long moment. Jewelry, $3 for 100. She thought about the anniversary card he had given her in June. A simple card, a sweet note, a dinner at a place they both liked. She had thought at the time that he seemed a little distracted, a little elsewhere, but she had chalked it up to work pressure and let it go. He had bought another woman jewelry the same month. He gave Emily a card that said, "You are my whole world." She picked up her pen. She went back to work. By 10:30 in the morning, the second enormous thing had already happened, though Emily didn't know it yet. Claire knew. Claire Metsuda had been Emily's closest friend since their sophomore year of college. 22 years of friendship that had survived distance. Different cities, different life choices. The particular strain that happens when one friend gets married and the other stays single, and they have to actively work to keep the gap from widening. Claire was perceptive in the way that people who have loved someone for 20 years are perceptive. She had noticed something off about Emily for weeks, had been watching, had been waiting, and when Emily called her that afternoon to ask if she could store a few boxes at her place, something in Emily's voice finally broke through the composure. "Emily," Claire said, "what's actually happening?" Emily said, "I just need to store some things." Claire said, "Emily, it's me. Talk to me." There was a silence. Then Emily said, "He's been having an affair. I have evidence. I have an attorney. It's being handled." The silence from Claire's end lasted approximately 2 seconds. And then, "I'm going to need you to say that again." Emily said, "You heard me." Claire said, Ryan, who I have had Thanksgiving dinner with for 8 years. Ryan, who gave a speech at my birthday party about what a lucky man he was. That Ryan is having an affair." Emily said, "Yes." Another silence. Then very quietly, "How long have you known?" Emily said, 3 weeks. Claire said, "And you've been carrying this alone for 3 weeks." Emily said, "I needed to be sure before I said anything to anyone. I needed to have everything in place. I couldn't let myself fall apart before the work was done." She heard Claire exhale slowly on the other end of the line. Then Claire said in a voice that was very controlled and very careful, "Emily, you are my best friend and I love you completely, and I want you to know that whatever you need from me, whatever role you need me to play in whatever plan you have built, I am there without question, without hesitation. Just tell me what to do." Emily felt something crack slightly in the back of her chest. Not break crack, just enough to let a little of the heat out. She said, "I need to store some boxes." Claire said, "Done. What else?" Emily said, "I might need a place to land for a few days after Friday." Claire said, "You have a key. You've always had a key." Emily said, "Thank you." Claire said, "Don't thank me. Just promise me you're going to be okay." Emily said, "I'm going to be better than okay." She believed it. She was almost surprised to realize how completely she believed it. The boxes started moving on Tuesday. Emily was strategic about it. She never took anything large enough to be obviously missed, never disturbed the surface of what their shared home looked like. The photographs she cared about most, the small oil painting she had bought in Santa Fe on a solo work trip 7 years ago, the one Ryan always said he didn't understand, and she had always secretly loved more because of that, her grandmother's pearl earrings, the journal she had kept since college, the things that were hers in the truest sense, not acquired together, not part of the shared life, but pieces of the person she had been before Ryan and would still be after. She moved them in her work bag and in canvas totes she brought in and out like groceries. Ryan noticed nothing. He was distracted. She could see it now clearly. The distraction she had mistaken for stress. The mental absence she had attributed to long work hours. He was somewhere else. He had been somewhere else for months. He ate dinner across from her on Tuesday night and talked about a conference call that had run long, and she watched his face and thought, "You are thinking about her right now at this table with me. You are thinking about her." She passed him the salad. She asked him about the conference call. She smiled in exactly the right places. She was very, very good at this. Now, on Wednesday afternoon, Sandra provided an update that made Patricia call Emily immediately. "He's changed the reservation," Patricia said without preamble. "He's moved the time from 7 to 7:30, Emily said. "Why?" Patricia said. "Sandra believes he told Olivia he wants to take her somewhere for a drink first. There's a bar 2 blocks from Meridian." She documented them entering together at 6:15 on a prior occasion. Emily said, "So, they'll arrive together," Patricia said. "Almost certainly." Emily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Does that change anything?" Patricia said, "It changes the optics. Not the plan. If anything, it's better. If she's sitting across the table when the envelope arrives, there's no buffer, no moment where he can intercept it, step outside, manage the situation. It happens in front of her." Emily said, "Then it's better." Patricia said, "Charles has been informed of the new arrival time. Everything remains on schedule. 7:45 delivery confirmed." Emily said, "Good." She hung up and sat at her desk and thought about Olivia Brooks for the first time in several days. She had deliberately kept herself from thinking too much about Olivia. It wasn't productive, and it had a tendency to pull her toward a kind of rage that felt good in the moment and useful for nothing. But now, thinking about the two of them walking into Meridian together, Olivia, in whatever she had chosen to wear for the night, she believed was going to change her life, believing that Ryan was finally ready. Now Emily felt something more complicated than rage. She felt strangely like Olivia deserved to know the truth too, not as a kindness, not as generosity, but because Olivia had been lied to just as completely as Emily had been used as a tool, as a fantasy, as an exit plan that Ryan never actually intended to execute. Because Ryan, Emily understood, now didn't want to leave his life. He wanted to add to it. He wanted the wife and the house and the reputation and the mistress and the secret dinners and the rose petals and the jewelry and the complete freedom from consequence. I thought he could have all of it indefinitely. He was wrong. Thursday arrived with the particular quality that the day before something important always has a kind of charge normally. Everything looking the same on the surface, while underneath the pressure builds and builds. Emily went to work. She had 3 meetings. She reviewed copy for a campaign her team had been developing. She ate lunch at her desk. She was to all observable evidence a woman having a perfectly ordinary Thursday. At 2:00 in the afternoon, Patricia texted her envelope delivered to Meridian. "Charles has confirmed receipt. Everything is in place." Emily read the text under her desk during a meeting. She typed back one word. "Good." She put her phone away. She focused on the meeting. That evening, Ryan made a phone call from the back porch while Emily was in the kitchen, and she did not strain to hear it, and she did not try to see his screen, and she did not do anything except make dinner and listen to the radio at a reasonable volume. She had everything she needed. She didn't need another piece of evidence. She didn't need to hear one more lie. She was done collecting. She was past the part of this that required gathering, and into the part that required simply waiting for what she had already set in motion to arrive. He came back inside and said the food smelled great, and she said, "Thanks, it's almost ready." And they ate dinner, and he told her a story about someone at his office, and she laughed in the right place, and she asked follow-up questions, and she was right up until the moment she went to bed, the wife he had always believed she was. She set her alarm for 6:30. She turned off her lamp. She thought tomorrow. She closed her eyes. And then Friday morning came. Emily was up before the alarm. She showered and dressed and came downstairs. And Ryan was already at the kitchen counter with his coffee already in his work clothes, and he looked up when she came in and said, "You're up early." She said, "Big day." He said, "Yeah. What's going on?" She said, "Just a project that's been building for a while. Today's the day it lands." He nodded. He said, "Well, good luck. You've got this." She looked at him. She said, "I know." She poured her coffee. He grabbed his jacket. He kissed her cheek on the way out. Warm, automatic. The kiss of a man who has performed this gesture so many times it no longer requires thought. And then he was gone. The door closing behind him with its ordinary sound. His car backing out of the driveway like every other morning. Emily stood at the kitchen counter with her coffee, and she listened to the sound of the engine fading down the street. She thought, "The next time I see you will be the last time you see this house." She picked up her phone. She sent Claire a text tonight. "Be ready." Claire responded in 40 seconds. "I'm ready. Have been for days." You, Emily, looked around the kitchen. The coffee maker, the fruit bowl, the photograph on the refrigerator from a trip they had taken to Colorado 4 years ago. The two of them on a mountain trail, laughing at something neither of them would now be able to remember. She had already taken the photographs that mattered. This one she was leaving behind. Let him look at it. She typed back, "Ready." She set her phone down and finished her coffee. At 9:00 in the morning, she called Patricia one final time. Patricia said, "Everything is confirmed. Charles will have the envelope brought to table 7 at 7:45 exactly. His staff has been briefed. The delivery will be handled by the most senior waiter on shift tonight, a man named Thomas, who has worked there for 11 years and can, according to Charles, deliver news to a table without changing his expression 1 degree. Emily said, "Perfect." Patricia said, "Emily, how are you feeling?" Emily considered the question honestly. She said, like someone who has been carrying a very heavy thing for a very long time and is about to set it down. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "After tonight, we move forward. You don't have to think about anything beyond tonight. Just let it happen." Emily said, "I know." Patricia said, "I'll be in touch first thing Saturday morning." Emily said, "Thank you, Patricia, for everything." Patricia said, "This is what I do. But you did the hard part. You held together when most people wouldn't have." Emily hung up. She put her phone in her bag. She walked out of her office, took the elevator down to the parking garage, got in her car, and drove to Claire's apartment. Claire was there waiting with takeout containers on the counter and a bottle of good wine already open on the table and the television on low in the background, and all the lights lit up warm and bright. She looked at Emily when she walked in. She said, "How are you doing?" Emily set her bag down. She stood in Claire's kitchen in her good work clothes, and she looked at her best friend, and she said, "Ask me in about 3 hours." Claire handed her a glass of wine. Emily took it. She sat down, and she waited for the clock to reach 7:45. She did not think about Ryan's face when the envelope landed on the table. She did not think about Olivia realizing what was happening. She did not think about the restaurant falling quiet, or the photographs inside the envelope, or the hotel receipts, or the text messages, or any of the 10,000 specific details she had spent the past 3 weeks living inside. She thought about the balcony of her new apartment, which she had finally visited in person on Wednesday morning before work. Standing outside in the early light looking at the city, she thought about how the air had felt. She thought about the way the skyline looked from that height, familiar and entirely new at the same time, like something she had always known was there, but had never quite allowed herself to see clearly. She thought, "That is mine now." Claire refilled her glass without being asked. At 7:43, Emily's phone lit up. A text from a number she didn't recognize, Patricia's investigator, Sandra, doing exactly what she had been asked to do if the plan held. The text said 4 words. It said, "He is inside." Confirmed. Emily read it. She put the phone face down on the table. She picked up her wine glass. 2 minutes. She thought about Ryan smoothing his tie in the mirror. She thought about the text he had sent on a Friday night. She has no idea. She thought about the receipt falling out of the suit jacket and landing face up on the floor. She thought about every dinner, every kiss, every carefully constructed lie told with a warm smile and a hand on her shoulder. She breathed in. 1 minute, she thought about her grandmother's voice. The first thing grief tries to do is make you stupid. Don't let it. She hadn't. The clock on Claire's microwave changed. 7:45. Somewhere across the city in a restaurant full of candlelight and quiet conversation and the soft sound of a pianist playing something beautiful, a man named Thomas, who had worked at Meridian for 11 years, was walking toward table 7 with a large envelope in his hands. Emily set down her glass. She closed her eyes. She thought now. 7:45 came and went, and Emily sat in Claire's apartment with her wine glass in both hands and did not move. Claire sat across from her. Neither of them spoke. The television was still on low in the background. Some cooking show, someone chopping vegetables with great urgency, and the sound of it was so aggressively normal that it almost felt funny. Almost. Claire had her own glass of wine, and she was watching Emily the way you watch someone who is standing very close to the edge of something. Not because you think they'll fall, but because you love them and you can't help it. At 7:48, Emily's phone lit up. Sandra again. The text said, "Envel delivered. Waiter confirmed. Standing by." Emily read it once. She read it twice. She set the phone down face up this time so she could see it the moment the next message came. Claire said quietly, "It happened." Emily said, "It's happening right now." Claire set down her own glass. She folded her hands on the table. She said nothing else. She understood in the way that 22 years of friendship had trained her to understand that this was not a moment for words. This was a moment to simply be present while something enormous moved through the air across the city. At that precise moment, Ryan Carter was holding an envelope he had not expected and could not yet make himself open. Emily didn't know that yet. She was about to find out. At 7:51, her phone rang. Not a text. A call. The number was Ryan's. She looked at it. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Claire watched her face. Emily watched the screen. On the 4th ring, she declined the call. He called back immediately. She declined it again. A text came through Emily. "Pick up the phone. Please." She put the phone face down. Claire said, "He called." Emily said, "He called." Claire said very carefully, "Are you okay?" Emily thought about it honestly. The way she had been making herself do everything these past weeks. Honestly, directly, without flinching from the real answer. She sat with the question for a full 3 seconds. Then she said, "Yes, I genuinely am." And she meant it. Her hands were not shaking. Her voice was level. What she felt in that moment was not triumph exactly, and it was not relief exactly. It was something more like the feeling of a pressure that has been building for a long time. Finally finding release. Like a window opened in a room that had been closed too long. Her phone lit up again. Another text from Ryan. "Where are you? I need to talk to you." Emily. "Please." Then another. "This is not what it looks like. I can explain. Call me." Then 30 seconds later, one that made Claire, who was reading over Emily's shoulder. Now because Emily had tilted the screen so she could see pull in a sharp breath. "I love you. Please just call me." Emily read that last one 3 times. She thought about the receipt on the kitchen floor. She thought about rose petals. She thought about the jewelry Gerald had found in the credit card records. She thought about the text from the secret phone. Can't stop thinking about last night. When are you going to tell her I'm tired of waiting? She turned the phone face down again. She said, "More wine." Claire stared at her for a second. Then she picked up the bottle and said, "You are the most composed person I have ever met in my life." Emily held out her glass. She said, "I had 3 weeks to practice." What Emily didn't know What she would only learn later in pieces from Sandra's report and from a source she hadn't expected was exactly what had happened at table 7 at 7:45, and the full story of it was more than she had planned for, even accounting for everything she had planned. Thomas, the senior waiter, had approached the table at 7:44. Ryan and Olivia were midway through their first course. The conversation, according to what Sandra could reconstruct from her position, had been warm. Olivia laughing at something Ryan had said. Ryan leaning forward with the particular posture of a man performing his most charming self. The table had champagne already poured, the kind of champagne you order when you believe the evening is a celebration. Thomas had set the envelope on the table in front of Ryan with both hands, the way you place something that requires care. He had said in a voice calibrated to be heard at the table and nowhere else, "Sir, a delivery from your wife." The word wife landed in that sentence like a stone dropped into still water. Olivia heard it first. Emily would later learn this from Sandra, who had a clear enough position to observe the table from a distance. Olivia's expression changed before Ryan's did because Olivia understood what it meant before Ryan had even processed the words. Olivia had been waiting for months to stop being a secret, and in one sentence, spoken by a stranger in a well-cut jacket, she understood that she was not about to stop being a secret. She was about to become a casualty. Ryan looked at the envelope for what Sandra estimated was 4 or 5 full seconds without touching it. Then he picked it up. He opened it the way you open something you already know is going to hurt you. Carefully, slowly, as if the pace of opening it might change what was inside. The first thing he saw was the cover letter from Patricia Novak's office on firm letterhead. 3 paragraphs that Sandra could not read from her position, but that Patricia had described to Emily in exact detail a formal notice of intent to dissolve the marriage of Emily Rose Carter and Ryan James Carter pursuant to Texas Family Code on grounds, including adultery, with attached evidence provided in support of said grounds behind the cover letter photographs. Not just any photographs. Sandra's photographs, time-stamped, geotagged, professionally captured images of Ryan and Olivia entering the Agilis Hotel in August, exiting together in September, walking into a restaurant on a Tuesday evening in October when Ryan had told Emily he was at a client dinner. Clear, undeniable, the kind of photographs that required no explanation because they explained themselves completely. Behind the photographs, the hotel receipts printed and organized by date. Behind the hotel receipts, the text messages transcribed and time-stamped, pulled from the records Patricia's firm had obtained through proper legal channels. And behind all of that, at the very back of the envelope, a single sheet of paper with 5 words written in Emily's own handwriting. Not typed, not printed, but written in the clear, precise script that Ryan had seen on birthday cards and grocery lists and anniversary notes for 10 years. The note said, "You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." Sandra reported that Ryan read the note and then sat completely still for somewhere between 10 and 15 seconds, not moving, not speaking, just sitting with the note in his hand, and the rest of the evidence spread across the white tablecloth in front of him and the champagne going flat in the glasses. Olivia across the table said, and this part Sandra heard clearly, "Ryan, what is that? What is all of that?" Ryan didn't answer. Olivia reached across and took one of the photographs. She looked at it. She set it down. She picked up another one. Sandra reported that Olivia's face went through approximately 4 distinct expressions in about 6 seconds. Confusion, recognition, understanding, and then something that collapsed into a kind of cold fury that had nowhere immediate to go. Because the fury that Olivia felt in that moment was not a simple fury. It was the fury of a woman who had been told she was special, who had been promised she was chosen, who had organized her emotional life around a man's word, and who was now sitting in a restaurant holding photographic evidence that the man had been running the same performance for 2 audiences simultaneously. Olivia said very quietly, "How long?" Ryan said, "Olivia," she said, "how long?" Ryan, "How long were you actually going to wait before telling her?" Were you ever going to tell her, or was this? She stopped. She looked at the photographs on the table. Her voice dropped even lower. Was I just something you were doing while you kept your real life exactly where you wanted it? Ryan said, It's not that simple. Olivia said, don't. Just that word. Don't. And something about the flatness of it, the way it came out without heat or tears or drama, was apparently more devastating than any scene could have been. Because Sandra reported that it was after that word that Ryan's composure, which had been holding barely since the envelope arrived, finally broke. He put his hands over his face. He sat in the middle of a full restaurant with the evidence of his double life spread across the table and his hands over his face. People at nearby tables had stopped pretending not to look. Olivia stood up. She picked up her bag from the back of her chair with the careful, deliberate movements of someone who is concentrating very hard on not breaking apart in public. She looked at Ryan one more time. She said in a voice that was almost completely steady, I hope she takes everything. And then she walked out of Meridian Restaurant and did not look back. Ryan sat alone at table 7 with the champagne and the photographs and the divorce papers. He picked up his phone. He called Emily, back at Claire's apartment. Emily's phone rang for the third time at 8:03. She looked at the screen. She looked at Claire. She turned the phone face down again. The calls kept coming. 8:07 Ryan calling. 8:11 Ryan calling. 8:14. A text. Emily, I know you planned this. I know what you did. We need to talk. You owe me that. Emily read that one and felt something move through her that was not quite anger. It was sharper than anger and colder. The feeling of someone who has heard one thing too many and has run completely out of patience for the performance. She picked up the phone. She typed back, I don't owe you anything. Ryan, check your voicemail. My attorney has left you a message with the next steps. Please direct all further communication to her office. She sent it. She put the phone down. Claire, who had read every word, looked at her with an expression that was equal parts admiration and something close to awe. She said, Emily. Emily said, What? Claire said, You are absolutely terrifying. I mean that as the highest possible compliment. Emily almost smiled. Actually, almost smiled the first real one in 3 weeks, pulling at the corner of her mouth in a way she didn't entirely try to stop. She said, Patricia says I'm in a strong position. Claire Eyre said, Patricia is an understatement. Ryan's response to the text came at 8:19. You're really doing this after everything after 10 years. Emily read it. She thought about responding. She decided against it. There was nothing to say to that sentence that her attorney hadn't already said more precisely and more permanently in the documents currently spread across a restaurant table across the city. She went to Patricia's voicemail. She hadn't yet played and put it on speaker so Claire could hear Emily. It's Patricia. Sandra has confirmed the delivery went as planned. I've left a message with Ryan's personal cell and will attempt contact at the home address tomorrow if we don't hear from his representation by noon. Your apartment keys are at my office. My assistant will have them for you first thing in the morning. Get some rest. Tonight was the hard part. Everything from here is process. Call me when you're ready. Claire listened to the whole message. Then she said, You have a new apartment. Emily said, I signed the lease 2 weeks ago. Claire said, You signed a lease and you didn't tell me. Emily said, I didn't tell anyone anything until I had everything in place. You know that's how I work. Claire shook her head slowly. Then she raised her glass and said, To you genuinely, to the most organized, most terrifying, most impressive woman I know. Emily raised her glass. She said, To actually being free. They drank. At 8:41, Sandra sent one final text. Subject has left Meridian. Drove to the residence. Lights on inside. No other activity. Have a good night. Miss Carter. Emily read it and felt the last piece of tension she had been carrying somewhere behind her sternum finally, completely release. Ryan was at the house that was already half emptied without his knowing. He was walking through rooms and finding absence where he had expected presence and beginning to understand maybe for the first time the actual size of what he had thrown away. She thought about him in the kitchen, finding her things gone, the small painting missing from the hallway, the jewelry box emptied, the closet half cleared. She thought about him standing in the bedroom they had shared for 10 years, and realizing that she had been planning this while she cooked him dinner, while she asked about his day, while she smiled and passed the salad and laughed in the right places. She hoped it felt like the floor dropping out. She thought it probably did. At 9:15, something happened that Emily had not planned for, and it was the twist she had genuinely not seen coming, which is perhaps why it hit her harder than everything else. Her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. She looked at Claire, who shrugged, and she answered. It was Olivia. Olivia Brooks called Emily Carter at 9:15 on the night the divorce papers were served. And Emily was so surprised that she sat completely still for 2 full seconds before she said, "Hello." Olivia's voice, on the other end, was not what Emily had expected. It was not hostile. It was not hysterical. It was very quiet and very controlled. And it had the particular texture of a voice that has recently finished crying and is now on the other side of it in the flat country beyond tears. Olivia said, "I got your number from. It doesn't matter how I got it. I'm sorry to call. I just needed to. I don't know what I needed. I wanted to say I'm sorry." Emily said nothing. She was listening. Olivia said, "I knew he was married. I want to be honest about that. I knew from the beginning. He told me it was over between you two, that you were basically roommates, that he had been trying to find a way out for years. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. And I know that doesn't make it okay. I just want you to know that I didn't. The person I thought he was doesn't exist. I understand that now." Emily sat with that for a moment. Then she said, "The person I thought he was doesn't exist either." Olivia was quiet. Then she said, how did you stay so calm? How did you plan all of that without falling apart?" Emily thought about the 20 minutes on the edge of the bathtub. She thought about the mirror. She thought about her grandmother. She said, "I fell apart exactly once. Then I went to work." Olivia said, "I don't think I could have done what you did." Emily said, "You don't know what you can do until you have to." There was a silence. Then Olivia said, "I'm not going to bother you again. I wanted you to know that I'm not your enemy. I know I was part of this, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. I just wanted you to hear that I'm sorry." Emily said, "Olivia." Olivia said, "Yes." Emily said, "Take care of yourself." She hung up. Claire had been watching her face through the entire call. When Emily lowered the phone, Claire said, "Was that?" Emily said, "Yes." Claire said, "What did she want?" Emily said, "To apologize." Claire looked at her, and Emily looked at her phone for a moment. Then she said, "She was telling the truth. I could hear it." She paused. "He lied to both of us in exactly the same way. He told her the same things he told me, that he was committed, that she was special, that he meant what he said. He just told us different versions of it." Claire said quietly, "That's a particular kind of evil." Emily said, "Yes, it is." She set the phone down. She leaned back in her chair. She looked at the ceiling for a moment, and when she looked back down, there was something different in her face. Not softer exactly, and not harder, but settled, resolved. The face of someone who has processed the last remaining piece of something enormous and found that she is still standing on the other side of it. At 10:20, Ryan called one more time. Emily watched it ring. When it went to voicemail, she listened to the message. His voice was wrecked. She could hear it, the rawness of it, the particular horrorousness of a man who has been alone for 2 hours with the truth about himself. He said, "Emily, I know I have no right to ask you anything right now. I know that. But please just I'm at the house, and it's you already moved things out. You planned all of this, and you didn't say a word, and Emily, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything right now. I know. But I need you to know that I'm sorry and that I love you, and I didn't think." He stopped a long silence. Then he said very quietly, "Please call me back." Emily held the phone after the message ended. Claire watched her. Emily said. He sounds broken. Claire said carefully. How does that feel? Emily sat with the question. She gave it the full honest attention it deserved. She said, It doesn't feel good. I want to be clear about that. I don't feel good hearing him like that. I'm not a person who enjoys that. She paused. But it also doesn't make me want to call him back, because broken doesn't mean changed. And sorry doesn't mean it didn't happen. And the man on that voicemail is the same man who sat across from me at dinner on Thursday night and looked me in the eye and said he'd be home late for a client thing. She looked at Claire. He's not sorry because he was wrong. He's sorry because he got caught. Claire nodded slowly. Emily said there's a difference. She did not call him back. She deleted the voicemail. She stayed at Claire's that night. They stayed up until nearly midnight talking about things that had nothing to do with Ryan Carter. Talking about Claire's work and a trip Claire was thinking of taking and the restaurant they had been meaning to try for 6 months. Normal things. Real things. The texture of ordinary life coming back and around the edges of everything. Filling in the space that the past 3 weeks had emptied out. At some point around 11:30, Emily realized she was genuinely laughing at something Claire had said about a disastrous date she'd been on the previous weekend. And the laughter felt uncomplicated and clean in a way that she hadn't felt in so long she had almost forgotten it was possible. She stopped mid-laugh and said, I forgot what this felt like. Claire said, What? Emily said this. Just this. Sitting here laughing without any of it underneath. Claire looked at her with an expression that was very full of feeling. She said, Get used to it. Emily smiled. She said, I intend to. She slept on Claire's couch that night under a blanket Claire brought from the linen closet. And she fell asleep almost immediately. Number 20 minutes on the edge of a bathtub. No careful breathing to prevent sound. No lying still in the dark next to a man she no longer recognized. Just sleep clean and complete. And entirely finally her own. And in the morning, there were keys waiting at Patricia's office. Keys to a door that was hers alone. Keys to a life she was just beginning to understand she was allowed to want. She reached for them both. The keys were exactly where Patricia had said they would be. Emily picked them up at 8:40 Saturday morning from Patricia's assistant, a young woman named Renee, who handed over the envelope with both hands and said with a warmth that felt entirely genuine, Congratulations, Miss Carter. Emily thanked her, tucked the envelope into her bag, and walked back out into the morning air. She sat in her car for a moment with the envelope in her lap. She opened it. 2 keys on a plain silver ring. An address on a card in Patricia's handwriting. Nothing elaborate. Nothing ceremonial. Just 2 pieces of metal that meant this space is yours. No one else's. Yours. She drove to the apartment. She let herself in. She stood in the empty living room. Just her no furniture, yet no boxes. Nothing but the light coming through the windows and the particular quiet of a space that hasn't been lived in yet, that is waiting to become something. And she breathed in and out, in and out. She walked to the balcony door and opened it and stepped outside and looked at the Dallas skyline in the Saturday morning light. And she thought, this is the first moment of the rest of my life. Not Friday night, not the divorce papers, not the phone calls or the deleted voicemail. This moment right here, standing on her own balcony, looking at a city she had lived in for 12 years, as though she was seeing it clearly for the very first time. She stayed out there for 10 minutes. Then she went back inside and started making a list of everything she needed. She was very good at lists. Now, Patricia called at 9:15. How's the apartment? She asked. Emily said, Perfect. Quiet. Mine. Patricia said, Good. Now, down to business. Ryan's representation contacted my office at 8 this morning. Emily said he already has an attorney. Patricia said he retained someone last night. Apparently, a man named David Kowalski. He's competent, not exceptional. He called to request a delay in the formal filing process to allow time for, quote, reconciliation discussions. Emily said no. Patricia said that's exactly what I told him. I also informed Mr. Kowalski that the adultery documentation we have is comprehensive, time-stamped, and fully admissible, and that any attempt to delay proceedings would simply give us more time to continue building our asset case. He went quiet for a moment after that. Emily said, "I imagine he did." Patricia said, "We proceed as planned. I'm filing formally Monday morning. Ryan will be formally served at his office by 11:00 a.m. Once that happens, everything becomes official and the 60-day waiting period begins under Texas law." Emily said, "And the house?" Patricia said, "He can stay in the house during the waiting period you've already vacated, which actually helps us. It establishes that you left your stable. You're not dependent on the marital home. That strengthens your position significantly." A brief pause. "Emily, I want to prepare you for something." Emily said, "What?" Patricia said, "The next few weeks are going to be uncomfortable in ways that have nothing to do with legal proceedings. What happened at Meridian on Friday night? People talk. Restaurant staff talk. Other diners talk. Ryan works in a professional community where reputation matters. This is going to spread, and when it does, you're going to become part of a story that other people are telling. Some of those people are going to reach out to you. Some of them won't. I want you to be ready for that." Emily said, "I'm ready for that." Patricia said, "I know you are. I just wanted to say it out loud." What Patricia meant became clear faster than Emily had anticipated. By Saturday afternoon, less than 20 hours after Thomas the waiter had placed that envelope on table 7, the story had already begun moving through the particular channels that stories move through in a city like Dallas, where professional and social worlds overlap in ways that make privacy both precious and nearly impossible. Emily didn't know the exact sequence of how it traveled. She would never know exactly who saw what at Meridian that night, whose friend texted whose cousin, which of Ryan's colleagues got a call from someone who had been dining 2 tables away. She only knew the result, which was that her phone began filling up Saturday afternoon with messages that ranged from stunned to furious to warmly, fiercely supportive, and that the messages were coming from people she had expected and people she had not. Her colleague Diane, who had worked alongside her for 4 years, sent a message at 217 Emily, "I just heard I'm so sorry and so angry on your behalf. Please let me know if you need anything." Her friend Marcus from graduate school, whom she hadn't spoken to in 8 months, sent heard, "What happened? You okay? Whatever you need." Ryan's college roommate, a man named Jeff, who had been at their wedding, and who Emily had always genuinely liked, called her directly at 3:40. She almost didn't answer. She answered. He said, "Emily, I don't know what to say." She said, "You don't have to say anything." "Jeff," he said, "I want you to know I had no idea. I know people probably say that, and you have no reason to believe it, but I genuinely didn't know. And He stopped. She could hear him searching for the right word. He said, "I'm ashamed of him for what it's worth." She said, "It's worth something. Thank you." He said, "Is there anything I can do?" She said, "No, but I appreciate you calling." He said, "You deserve so much better than this." She said, "I know. I'm starting to act like it." After she hung up, she sat with her phone in her hand and thought about how strange it was the way a lie collapses, not just on the person who told it, but on everyone who was near it. All the people who had shared meals with them, attended their parties, bought them wedding gifts, wished them happy anniversaries. All the people who had believed in the version of Ryan and Emily that Ryan had constructed and maintained. They were all standing in the rubble of it now, trying to figure out what was real and what wasn't. She thought, "I know exactly how that feels." But she didn't have time to sit with it long, because the thing that Patricia had warned her about, the discomfort that had nothing to do with legal proceedings, arrived at 408 in the form of a text from a number she recognized as Ryan's mother. The text said, "Emily, I need to talk to you. Please call me when you can." Emily stared at that message for a long time. Margaret Carter was 71 years old, a woman who had been kind to Emily from the very beginning, who had welcomed her into the family with a genuine warmth that Emily had never taken for granted. She was also Ryan's mother, which meant that whatever she felt right now was existing inside a conflict that Emily had not created, but also could not resolve. Emily typed back, "Hi, Margaret. I'm so sorry you're going through this. I'll call you soon. I promise." She sent it. She put the phone down. She was not going to be able to call Margaret today. Not yet. She needed a few more days of solid footing before she could hold that conversation with the steadiness it deserved. Margaret would understand that, or she wouldn't. But Emily was learning slowly and deliberately that her first obligation was to herself. Her therapist would have agreed. She had made her first appointment with a therapist named Dr. Sarah Afer on Wednesday of the previous week. A decision she had made not out of crisis, but out of the same methodical logic she had applied to everything else. She had told Dr. Afer at the start of the session, "I'm not here because I'm falling apart. I'm here because I want to make sure I don't fall apart 6 months from now when I think everything is fine and the ground opens up under me." Dr. Afer had said, "That's one of the most self-aware things a new client has ever said to me in a first session." Emily had said, "I've had 3 weeks to think." Dr. Afer had smiled. They had talked for an hour. Emily had cried twice. Not the convulsive crying of the bathtub, but the quieter kind, the kind that comes when you're telling the truth about something you've been protecting. She had felt walking out of the office like a room that had been aired out, like something that needed light had finally gotten it. She called Dr. Afer's office Saturday afternoon and left a message asking to move their Tuesday appointment to Monday if possible. She had a feeling she was going to need it sooner. She was right. Sunday was when Ryan showed up. She was at the apartment, which had no furniture, yet beyond an air mattress Claire had lent her and a folding chair she'd bought at a drugstore. She was eating takeout from a place down the street and reading a book she hadn't had time to open in weeks. And her phone showed Ryan's number at 11:47 in the morning. She didn't answer. He called again at noon. She didn't answer. He called a third time at 12:08 and she answered because 3 calls in 20 minutes felt like something she needed to shut down directly. She said, "Ryan, you need to go through Patricia's office." "I've told you." He said, I know that. Emily, I need to hear your voice. I need to know you're okay." She said, "I'm fine." He said, "Where are you?" "You're not at Claire's." He stopped. Emily went completely still. She said very carefully, "You went to Claire's." A pause. He said, "I just needed to know you were safe." Emily said, "Ryan, listen to me very carefully. Do not go to Claire's apartment. Do not come to my workplace. Do not try to find where I am living. If you do any of those things, I will ask Patricia to file for a protective order. And I will get one because I have an attorney who is very good at her job. Do you understand me?" Silence. Then he said in a voice that had gone very small, "I just wanted to talk to you." She said, "There is nothing to talk about. The papers have been filed. This is happening. Please respect that." He said, "Emily, I made a mistake." She said, "Ryan." He said, I know. It was more than a mistake. I know it went on too long. I know there's no excuse. Can we just talk one conversation?" Emily thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. She said no. She said it without cruelty, and without heat, and without any of the anger she had every right to feel. She said it the way you close a door that you have made a considered, permanent decision to close firmly, completely with both hands. She said goodbye, Ryan. She ended the call. She set her phone down. She picked up her book. Her hands were not shaking. She would note that later to Dr. Afer as the moment she knew she was going to be okay. Not the Friday night, not the keys, not even the balcony. The moment she said no without any part of her wavering, without the decade of love pulling her hand back toward the open door. That moment on Sunday with the takeout going cold on the floor beside her and the book in her hands and the silence of her own apartment around her. That was the moment. Monday arrived with a particular clarity of a day that has been organized properly. Emily met with Dr. Afer at 9 earlier than their regular time. She told her about Ryan showing up at Claire's. She told her about the phone calls. She told her about the voicemail she had deleted and the texts she had never responded to. Dr. Okafor listened with the kind of attention that makes you say more than you plan to. At the end, Dr. Afer said, "How did you feel when you told him no on Sunday?" Emily said free. Dr. Aper wrote something down. Then she said, I want to ask you something that might be uncomfortable. Emily said, Go ahead. Dr. Aper said, Is there any part of you that wants him to suffer? Emily thought about it honestly. She said there was in the beginning, the first week when I was still finding things. Yes, there was a part of me that wanted him to hurt the way I was hurting. She paused. But that's not what I feel now. What I feel now is I just want it to be over. I want it to be clean and finished and behind me. I don't want to spend energy thinking about whether he's suffering or not. That's not my job anymore. Dr. Okafor said that's a very healthy place to be. Emily said it took work to get here. Dr. Okafor said it always does. At 11:00 a.m. Monday morning, Ryan was formally served the divorce papers at his office. Patricia texted Emily at 11:04 served. Confirmed by process server. He accepted. No incident. Emily read the text in the parking lot outside Dr. Okapor's building. She thought it's real now. Officially, legally, permanently real. She waited for something to hit her. Some wave of grief or relief or something large and final. What came instead was quiet. Just quiet. The city going about its business around her people. Walking past traffic. Moving the ordinary world. Continuing at its ordinary pace. Entirely unimpressed by the legal dissolution of Emily Carter's marriage. She texted Patricia back. Thank you. Keep me updated. She started her car. She went to work. The office was the same. Her desk was the same. Her team was the same. Though Diane caught her eye across the room when she came in and gave her a look that said, I see you. I'm here. Emily nodded back. That was enough. She had 3 meetings and a presentation to review and 2 new campaigns in early development that needed her attention. And she gave all of it her full organized focus because that was what the work required, and because throwing herself into the work was not avoidance. It was the thing that had always been true about her, the thing that was still true, the part of herself that had survived intact, and maybe, if she was honest, had come through the last 3 weeks sharper than it was before. Her director, a woman named Helen, who had been in the industry for 30 years and had seen more than she ever discussed, called her into her office at 3:00 in the afternoon. Helen said, Close the door. Emily closed it. Helen looked at her across the desk with the direct, no-pretense gaze of a woman who is not going to waste either of their time. She said, How are you actually doing? Emily said, Better than I expected. Helen said, I heard something happened. I don't need to know the details. Emily said, I'm going through a divorce. It's being handled. Helen nodded once. Then she said, I want to talk to you about the Meridian account. Emily blinked. The Meridian account was one of the largest new business opportunities the firm had been pursuing for 8 months. A national luxury hospitality brand looking for a new marketing partner. A contract that would represent a significant expansion of their client base. She said, What about it? Helen said, The pitch is in 3 weeks. I want you to lead it. Emily said, Helen. Helen said, I know what you've been going through. I'm asking you because of it, not in spite of it. I've been watching you for 2 weeks, and you are the sharpest I have ever seen you. Whatever has happened in your personal life has. And I mean this. It's focused you in a way I've rarely seen in 20 years of this business. She leaned forward. You're not the same person who walked in here 6 weeks ago. Emily, I don't know exactly who you are now, but I want that person leading my biggest pitch. Emily sat with that for a moment. Then she said, Give me the brief. Helen slid a folder across the desk. Emily picked it up. She walked out of Helen's office and back to her desk, and she opened the folder and she read it cover to cover without stopping. Her mind moved through it the way it moved through everything now. Quickly, clearly, without the low-level interference that she hadn't even realized had been running in the background of her thinking for months. The static of a marriage that wasn't what she believed it to be. The constant, subconscious expenditure of energy that goes into loving someone who is lying to you. It was gone, all of it, and what was left in its place was something clean and fast and entirely, completely hers. She picked up her pen. She started writing. Ryan contacted Patricia's office 3 times that week. His attorney, David Kowalski, called twice, requesting meetings, proposing alternatives, suggesting mediation. Patricia declined each contact efficiently and professionally. She reported to Emily that Ryan was attempting to negotiate the terms of the asset settlement, raising objections to several of the positions Patricia had taken regarding the joint investment accounts and the equity in the house. Patricia said he's going to push back on the investment accounts. He believes he has a stronger claim to them because of the income ratio he contributed more financially, which is technically accurate, Emily said, and Patricia said, and the adultery documentation changes the calculation entirely under Texas law. His attorney knows this. He's posturing. A brief pause. I want you to know this could get contentious before it gets clean. He may try to drag it out. Emily said, let him try. Patricia said, that's the correct answer. Thursday of that week. Something happened at Ryan's company that Emily learned about not from Sandra, not from Patricia, but from Diane, who had a contact at Ryan's firm, and who sent Emily a careful, quietly worded text at 4:15. Heard Ryan's company opened an internal review. Something about conduct policies. Thought you should know. Emily read the text and felt something she had not expected to feel complicated. Not satisfaction, she had been honest with herself about not wanting his destruction, but something more layered than that. The understanding that actions have weight that travels further than the person who takes them. That what Ryan had done had not stayed contained inside the walls of their marriage. It had moved into his professional world, into his reputation, into the opinion of people he worked alongside every day. And it was doing what truth always does when it finally gets loose. It was finding every surface. She texted Diane back. Thank you for telling me. She did not say anything else. She did not reach out to anyone at Ryan's company. She did not comment, did not amplify, did not do anything that could be characterized as using the situation to cause additional harm. That was not who she was. It had never been who she was. And she was not going to become someone different because she was angry. But she noted it. She filed it. She understood that the life Ryan had spent so much energy constructing was dismantling itself, and that she had not had to lift a finger beyond walking out the door. That she thought was a kind of justice that required no further participation. Friday arrived exactly 1 week since Meridian, and Emily marked it privately without ceremony. She was in her apartment, which now had a couch and a real bed and the small oil painting from Santa Fe hanging on the wall where she could see it from the kitchen. It was starting to look like a place where someone lived, where she lived. The distinction felt important every single time she thought about it. She made coffee. She stood on the balcony. She looked at the skyline. She thought about Friday 1 week ago, the anxiety that she had refused to call anxiety, the wine at Claire's table. The clock moving toward 7:45, Sandra's text. She thought about how long that week had felt while she was inside it, and how different it looked from the outside of it already. Her phone rang. She expected Patricia or Claire or possibly Diane. It was Margaret Carter. She answered. Margaret said, Emily, thank you for picking up. Emily said, of course. Margaret. A silence. Then Margaret said in a voice that was very careful and very tired, I want you to know that I am not calling to defend him. I want to be very clear about that. What he did is indefensible. I raised him to be better than this. And I am heartbroken and ashamed. Emily said, Margaret. Margaret said, please let me finish. I spent 10 years watching you love my son, watching you build a life with him, watching you be frankly a better partner than he deserved. Though I would not have said that while things were good. Her voice broke slightly, then steadied. I want you to know that I see you not as Ryan's wife, as Emily, as a woman who was wronged by my son, who handled it with more dignity than most people could manage, and who deserves every good thing that comes next. Emily felt her throat tighten. She breathed through it. She said, thank you, Margaret. That means more than you know. Margaret said, will you keep in touch? I know you have no obligation to. I know I'm on the wrong side of this, in a way, just by being his mother. But I would very much like to know that you're all right." Emily said, "I'll keep in touch." She meant it. After she hung up, she stood on her balcony for a long time with her coffee going cold in her hands. She thought about how grief was never one thing. It was always several things at once, layered and contradictory. The loss and the relief and the love that was real even inside the betrayal, and the anger that was clean and justified, and the strange, specific sadness of losing people you had not realized you were also losing when you lost the marriage. Margaret Jeff, the shape of holidays, the particular version of the future she had believed was coming. She thought, I am allowed to grieve all of that. She thought, and then I am allowed to build something new. She finished her coffee. She went inside. She opened the Meridian account brief on her laptop. She worked for 4 hours straight, and it was some of the best work she had ever done. At 7 in the evening, exactly 1 week after Thomas the waiter had approached table 7 with an envelope in his hands, Emily Carter sat in her own apartment in the city she loved, doing work that was entirely hers, in a life that was, for the first time and longer than she could clearly remember, completely honest. She thought about Ryan, not with warmth exactly, but without hatred. She thought about him in the house they used to share, or wherever he was now, living inside the consequences of the choices he had made over and over again when he could have chosen differently. She thought about what it must feel like to lose your marriage and your reputation and your mistress and your clean reflection in the mirror all at once. And she found that she couldn't sustain any particular emotion about it. She had her own life to think about. She had a pitch to win. She had a balcony to stand on in the morning. She had work to do, and somewhere in the particular way that the future announces itself, not with fanfare, but with quiet, Emily Carter felt the ground solidifying under her feet, felt herself settling into the shape of who she was going to be next, and understood that the worst was behind her. The best, she thought, looking at the Dallas skyline going gold and then dark beyond her window, was still coming. 3 weeks after the Meridian pitch brief landed on her desk, Emily Carter stood in the largest conference room at her firm and delivered the best presentation of her professional life. She had worked on it for 21 days, not obsessively. She was sleeping, now actually sleeping, the deep, uninterrupted kind that she had forgotten was possible, but with a focus so clean and complete that it surprised even her. Every morning, she woke up in her apartment, made coffee, stood on her balcony for 10 minutes, looking at the city, and then sat down and worked. The brief, the strategy, the creative concept, the numbers. She built the whole thing from the foundation up. The way you build something when you're no longer spending half your energy holding up a structure that was quietly collapsing around you. Helen had given her a team of 4. She ran them, well, clearly with high expectations, with the kind of leadership that comes from knowing exactly what you want and being willing to say so. Diane was on the team and kept sending Emily looks across the conference table during their planning sessions that said, I see what's happening to you, and it's something. On the morning of the pitch, Emily got dressed in the suit she had bought 2 weeks earlier, not the careful, understated clothes she had worn for years as Ryan Carter's wife at Ryan Carter's company events, but something sharper, something with more authority in its lines, something that looked like who she was becoming rather than who she had been. She drove to the office. She set up the room. She ran through the deck one final time. Helen came in at 8:50 and looked at the setup and said, You ready? Emily said completely. Helen looked at her for a moment. She said, Whatever has happened to you in the last month, don't lose it. Emily said, I don't intend to. The Meridian executives arrived at 9:00, 4 of them, led by a woman named Catherine Walsh, who had a reputation in the industry for being precise, demanding, and almost impossible to impress. Emily had researched her thoroughly. She knew what Catherine Walsh responded to and what she didn't, and she had built the entire presentation around the things that mattered to her specifically rather than the things that looked good generically. Emily stood up and she began. She spoke for 45 minutes. She did not read from the deck. She knew every number, every creative rationale, every strategic pivot point by memory because she had lived inside the material for 3 weeks and it had become part of how she was thinking. Catherine Walsh asked 7 questions, sharp probing questions, the kind designed to find the places where a presentation is confident on the surface but hollow underneath. Emily answered everyone without hesitation. At the end, Catherine Walsh looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "Miss Carter, how long have you been in this industry?" Emily said, 15 years. Catherine said, "And this is the first time I've sat across from you." Emily said, "Yes." Catherine said that won't be the case going forward. Helen, sitting at the far end of the table, kept her expression completely professional. But Emily saw her press her lips together in the way she did when she was very pleased and not quite letting it show. The official call came 4 days later. The firm had won the Meridian account. It was the largest new client they had brought on in 3 years. Helen called Emily into her office and told her, and then said without any preamble, "I'm recommending you for the director position that opens in January. Senior Director, National Accounts." Emily said, "Helen." Helen said, "Don't argue with me. You've earned it. And frankly, I should have done this a year ago." Emily sat with that for a moment. A year ago, she had been in a marriage that was eating her alive from the inside, and she hadn't even known it. A year ago, she had been spending energy. She didn't realize she was spending giving attention to something that wasn't giving anything real back. And the work had reflected that not badly, never badly, but not at her full capacity. "Not like this." She said, "Thank you, Helen." Helen said, "Thank yourself. You did the work." Walking back to her desk, Emily thought about a version of herself from 4 months ago who would have received that news and immediately called Ryan to tell him, who would have come home that evening and made dinner, and sat across the table from a man who was texting his mistress and told him about her win, and watched him smile and say all the right things and felt for a moment like her life was full. She thought about how that woman would have had no idea how empty the room actually was. She picked up her phone. She called Claire. Claire screamed so loudly that Emily had to hold the phone away from her ear. She was smiling when she put it back. The divorce proceedings moved with the efficient, slightly grinding pace of legal processes, never as fast as you want, always requiring one more document, one more signature, one more exchange between attorneys. Patricia managed it with her customary precision. Ryan's attorney continued to push on the asset division, continue to raise objections, continue to deploy the various procedural tactics that attorneys use when their client's position is weak, but their client refuses to accept it. Emily let Patricia handle all of it. She checked in twice a week, reviewed what she needed to review, signed what she needed to sign, and otherwise kept her attention on the things in her life that were growing rather than the things that were ending. The twist she had not predicted came in the form of a phone call from Patricia on a Wednesday afternoon in December. 8 weeks after the filing, Patricia said, "I have something to tell you that's going to feel complicated." Emily said, "Tell me." Patricia said, "Ryan's company completed their internal review. He's been asked to resign." Emily was quiet. Patricia said the conduct review found violations of their professional relationship policy, specifically the relationship with Olivia Brooks, who was a direct report in his department. "He's negotiated a quiet exit, but it's an exit. He's out." Emily said, "What about Olivia?" Patricia said she resigned voluntarily 3 weeks ago. "I believe she's already taken a position at another firm." Emily absorbed this. She thought about Ryan, who had built his professional identity as carefully as he had built everything else. The title, the reputation, the salary, the corner office that he had talked about, as though it was proof of something. She thought about losing all of it at once. The marriage, the mistress, the career, the carefully constructed story about who he was. She thought about what it cost a person to have every single scaffolding removed simultaneously. She said, "I didn't want that." Patricia said, "I know you didn't, but these are the consequences of choices he made." Emily, you didn't cause them. You simply stopped protecting him from them. Emily sat with that sentence for a long time after she hung up. She stopped protecting him from them. She thought about how much energy she had spent over 10 years smoothing things over, covering gaps, being the steady one, being the one who showed up and held the shape of the life they were supposed to be building. She thought about how thoroughly and invisibly she had been managing the presentation of a marriage that only one of them was actually in. She had been protecting him for years without knowing it. She was done. She called Dr. Afer, and they talked through it for an hour. She cried briefly, not for Ryan, but for the amount of herself she understood now that she had given to something that wasn't real. Dr. Aper said, "Grief isn't always about losing something good. Sometimes it's about understanding the cost of what you endured." Emily wrote that down in the journal she had been keeping since she moved into the apartment, the one she wrote in every morning after she stood on the balcony with her coffee. She read it back to herself that night before she went to sleep. Then she put the journal down and slept without dreaming. January arrived, and with it the kind of clarity that cold weather sometimes brings. Everything sharper, the air thinner, the light coming at a lower angle that made the city look new. Emily officially accepted the senior director promotion on the 3rd of January. She signed the paperwork in Helen's office and shook Helen's hand and felt the particular solidity of a door opening rather than closing. She took her team to lunch to celebrate. They sat around a table at a restaurant she had chosen. Not Maison, not Meridian, somewhere entirely new and entirely hers. And she looked around at the faces of the people she worked with and felt something that she had to pause to identify correctly because it had been absent for long enough that it needed a moment to be recognized. Contentment. Simple, uncomplicated contentment. Right here in this room with these people doing this work in this life that was hers. She ordered the good wine. She proposed a toast. She said to doing the work. Everyone raised their glasses. Diane caught her eye across the table and mouthed, "You good?" Emily mouthed back, "Yeah, I really am." It was true. The settlement was finalized in the 3rd week of January, which was 11 days earlier than the minimum waiting period required, which meant Ryan's attorney had stopped fighting and accepted Patricia's terms with the minor adjustments that Patricia had anticipated and already accounted for. Emily received her fair share of the marital assets, which, thanks to the adultery documentation, and Gerald, the accountant's thorough work, was genuinely fair in the way that legal processes rarely achieve without a very good attorney on your side. The house sold. Ryan moved into an apartment across the city. The investment accounts were divided. The retirement funds were protected. It was, Patricia said, one of the cleaner resolutions she had seen in a case with this level of conflict. Emily signed the final papers on a Tuesday afternoon in Patricia's office, and when it was done, she sat for a moment with the pen still in her hand. Patricia said, "How do you feel?" Emily said, "Like I can breathe." Patricia said, "Good." She gathered the papers efficiently, aligning them with the precise movements of a woman who had done this 1,000 times and still took it seriously. Then she looked up and said, "You handled this with remarkable grace. Emily, I've worked with a lot of people in situations like yours, and very few of them manage it the way you did." Emily said, "I had a good attorney." Patricia almost smiled. She said, "Yes, you did, but that's not what I'm talking about." Emily understood what she was talking about. She nodded. She stood up. She shook Patricia's hand. She picked up her bag and she walked out of the office, and she took the elevator down and walked out into the January afternoon. She stood on the sidewalk outside the building. She breathed in cold air. She thought, "It's done." She did not feel triumph. She did not feel collapse. She felt light, not the absence of weight, but a different kind of weight. The weight of someone standing fully in their own life with both feet without holding anything else up. She walked to her car. She drove home. She stood on her balcony. And that was where she was standing 8 weeks later on a Saturday morning in March when Daniel Foster called her for the first time. She almost didn't know who he was when she saw the name on her phone. She had met Daniel briefly, very briefly, barely 20 minutes at a professional event in February. He was an architect there because one of the developers he worked with had an adjacent relationship to the marketing firm that was hosting. They had talked at the edge of the room away from the main, gathering about something she could no longer quite reconstruct. Work the city, something about a building he was designing on the east side. He had been interesting in the unshowy way that people who are genuinely interested in ideas tend to be interesting. He had not tried too hard. He had not performed. He had just talked to her like she was a person he was glad to be talking to. And when someone had pulled her away toward a group conversation, he had said, "It was good to meet you, Emily," and meant it in the simple, uncomplicated way those words are usually not meant. She had given him her card. She had not thought about it much after. Now his name was on her phone on a Saturday morning in March. She answered. He said, "Emily, it's Daniel Foster. We met at the Halcyon event in February. I hope this isn't a strange call," she said. "Not strange." "Hi," he said. "I've been thinking about calling for a few weeks and kept not doing it. And then I decided I was being ridiculous. So here I am." A brief pause. "I was wondering if you'd want to get coffee sometime." Emily looked out at the city from her balcony. She said, "Can I ask you something first?" He said, "Sure." She said, "Why did you wait a few weeks?" A small silence. Then he said, "Honestly, because I wanted to be sure I was calling for the right reason. I went through a difficult year, personally not long ago, and I know how it feels to want to reach out to someone when what you actually need is to sit with yourself for a while longer. I didn't want to do that to you, or to myself." Another pause. "I think I've sat with myself long enough." Emily said nothing for 3 seconds. She thought, "This is a different kind of man." She said, "Coffee sounds good." They met the following Thursday at a place she had discovered near her office. Not somewhere she had ever gone with Ryan. Not somewhere loaded with history. Somewhere entirely clean and new. Daniel was already there when she arrived, which she noticed. I was reading something on his phone, and he looked up when she came in and stood up to greet her the way people who have genuine manners do automatically, without thinking about whether it will be noticed. They sat down. They ordered. They talked. She had expected it to feel effortful. Expected to feel the particular weight of someone who has been hurt trying to be open again. The way you feel when you've had a bad fall and you're trying to convince your body that it's safe to move at full speed. It didn't feel like that. It felt surprisingly natural, like a conversation that was already in progress. He told her about the year he'd had, not in a way that was asking for sympathy, but in a way that was honest, because she had asked, and he had answered truthfully. He had been with someone for 6 years. She had been unfaithful. He had spent a long time trying to fix something that she had already decided to leave, and he had eventually understood that the trying itself was the problem. He said, "At some point, you realize you've been standing in the doorway of a house that the other person has already left, and you can keep standing there, or you can close the door and go somewhere else." Emily said, "How do you know when you're ready to go somewhere else?" He said, "When you stop looking at the door." She thought about that. She said, "I'm not looking at the door." He said, "I know. I can tell." She said, "How?" He said, "Because you walked in here and you sat down and you were completely present. You weren't looking over your shoulder. You weren't performing being okay. You were just here." She looked at him across the table. She said, "You're very observant." He said, "It's an occupational habit. Architects spend a lot of time watching how people move through spaces. You learn to read where someone's attention actually is." She said, "And where is my attention?" He said, without missing a beat, "Right here. Same as mine." She picked up her coffee cup. She felt something warm and uncomplicated moving through her that was not the adrenaline of crisis or the numbness of recovery or the focused clarity of building something under pressure. It was simpler than all of those things. It was the feeling of a door opening, a real door, not the one she'd been closing, a new one in a wall she hadn't known was there. She thought, "Oh, so this is what it's supposed to feel like." They stayed for 2 hours. When they finally stood up to leave, he said, "Would you want to do this again?" She said, "Yes." He said, "Same time next week." She said, Same time next week. He smiled. She smiled back. She walked out into the March afternoon, and the air was cold and bright, and the city was doing its Thursday thing all around her, and she felt standing on the sidewalk outside a coffee shop, so completely, solidly, unambiguously herself, that she stopped walking for a second, just to feel the ground under her feet. Solid, completely solid. She called Claire on the way to her car. Claire said, "How was it?" Emily said, "Good, really good." Claire said, "Define really good." Emily said, "We're doing it again next week." Claire made a sound that was not quite a word, but communicated an enormous amount. Emily said, "He's different." Claire, he was just honest the whole time. He didn't try to impress me. He didn't perform. He just sat there and talked to me like I was a person he was genuinely interested in. Claire said, "That is in fact the minimum requirement." Emily said, "I know, but I forgot what it felt like." Claire was quiet for a second. Then she said softly, "You deserve that. You deserve someone who just shows up and tells the truth." Emily said, "I'm starting to believe that." Claire said, "You should have believed it for years." Emily said, "I know, but I believe it now. That's what matters." She got in her car. She sat for a moment before starting the engine. She thought about October, the receipt on the kitchen floor, the quiet of the house, the cold granite under her palms. She thought about the 20 minutes on the edge of the bathtub. She thought about her grandmother's voice. She thought about Patricia's office and Sandra's surveillance logs and the envelope delivered with 2 hands by a man who had worked at Meridian for 11 years and did not change his expression 1 degree. She thought about this note she had written in her own handwriting. "You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." She had made it every single day since she had made it again in the apartment, in the work, in the therapy sessions with Dr. Afer, in the morning coffee, on the balcony, in the journal, in the promotion, in the settlement. In every moment she had chosen to walk forward instead of looking back. And now she was sitting in a parking lot in March, feeling the particular warmth of something beginning. And it was real, and it was hers, and it had been earned at a price she would not have chosen to pay, but would never pretend had not made her exactly who she was sitting here being. She started the car. She drove home. She made dinner in her own kitchen, in her own apartment, in the life she had built from the rubble of a lie. And the food was good, and the evening was quiet, and the city glowed outside her window, and she was in every way that actually counted completely free. 6 months later, on an evening in September, 1 year almost to the week since the receipt had fallen out of a charcoal gray suit jacket and landed face up on a hardwood floor, Emily Carter stood on her balcony in the last light of a warm day and looked at the Dallas skyline going gold at the edges. She heard the key in the door. Daniel, who had a key now, the way people who are real and present and honest eventually earn the right to a key, came in and found her where she always was at this hour, on the balcony, coffee in hand, watching the city. He came out and stood beside her. He didn't say anything immediately. That was one of the things she loved about him. He understood that some moments were for being in, not for filling with words. After a while, he said, "Good day." She said, "Good day. Great day. Actually." He said, "Yeah." She said, "Patricia called. The final financial transfer cleared this morning. Everything is done. Completely. Permanently. Finally done." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How does that feel?" She thought about it. She gave it the full honest consideration it deserved, the way she gave everything now. She said, "Like I'm standing exactly where I'm supposed to be." He put his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into it, not because she needed the support, but because she wanted it, which was the only reason to lean into anything. The city spread out before them, lit and alive, doing what cities do, going about its enormous ongoing business, entirely without reference to one woman's survival and recovery and return to herself. Emily looked at it and thought, a year ago, I was holding a receipt on a kitchen floor. A year ago, everything I thought I had was false. A year ago, I lay down next to a man who was lying to me and stared at the ceiling in the dark and made a list. And now she was here. standing in the truth, in a life that was real in every room, real in every conversation, real all the way through, with no hollow spaces, no locked phones, no receipts falling out of pockets like small paper confessions. She had not waited to be rescued. She had not fallen apart. She had not given him the satisfaction of watching her dissolve. She had gathered her evidence and hired her attorney and moved her boxes and signed her lease and delivered her truth to a candle-lit table across the city. And then she had walked away and built something better, not perfect, real. And real Emily Carter had learned was worth more than perfect would ever be. She stood on her balcony with the man who told her the truth and looked at the city she had always loved. And the last of the day's light moved across the skyline, and she held it all, the grief and the growth, the loss and the becoming, the woman she had been and the woman she was now. She held all of it without flinching, and she was completely and at last, and without any remaining doubt-free,